I'm aware that we've started talking about correction. We've
Yes.
talked about teachable moments,
Yes.
and there's a phrase we haven't yet used, which we do need to start using, which is the subordination of teaching to learning.
Right.
Which is Gattegno's phrase that essentially he thought it's a funny. I mean, he spoke French better than he spoke English, or before he spoke English, so it perhaps sounds better or more accessible in French than English.
Not really.
Perhaps not. Okay, all right. But the idea is that the teaching should grow out of the learning, or
Yes.
should come out of the learning of the student. Every teacher would say, "Oh, that's what I do. You know, I'm interested in the student's learning. I don't want to teach with a capital T." How would you respond when people say that, or when people say, "Oh, well, of course"? Why is it not just a given? Why is it not just a platitude to talk about the subordination of teaching?
Well, if somebody said that to me, I would say, well, then do you teach silently?
Okay.
Right? And if they say, no, actually I talk quite a lot, well, then I'd say, all right, well, then you're not subordinating your teaching to the student's learning. Right? How do you subordinate?
That must be too progressive. There must be excellent teachers who are subordinating teaching to learning, who do talk quite happily.
Yes, but as soon as teachers start talking, I think much of the time what they're doing is explaining things. What's important is that my teaching grows out of what I see the students doing. For example, as we said before, we have A who asks a question, B who answers the question, and B does it with a mistake. Sure. The mistake tells me what I should be doing. He has made his mistake. Yes. And that's what it means to say I'm subordinating my teaching to his learning. He needs to learn that particular point, so that is the point that I'll work on. He needs to learn the pronunciation of this, that is what I will work on. And so what decides what I do in the classroom on a moment-by-moment basis is what happens, what the students do, what I see them do, and that tells me what I should be doing. So I would never go into the classroom with a plan, for example, because as soon as I have a lesson plan, then it's going to be what I want to do, not what they want to do. And for me, the more the lesson is planned, the less it can be successful, if you like. What happens then is that the teacher is just telling students things, but she doesn't really know whether she's actually addressing herself perfectly to anyone in the classroom. Generally speaking.
Are you really saying there's no plan, there's no forethought at all involved? I mean, to say that you have a planning, having a lesson plan is one of the sort of the cornerstones. It's heretical to say that you wouldn't have any notion about what's going to happen in the class. Is that genuinely how you would go into a class?
Well, yes and no. I don't know what the content is going to be. I'm talking about an intermediate class. A beginner class is different. But talking about an intermediate class, no, I usually have no idea what's going to happen. I don't know what the subject will be. The subject is the student's responsibility.
Well, that's for content, but in terms of what they're going to learn, they're not going to learn the content. They're going to learn something new about English or French or whatever language is in this class. Do you have no idea going into that class what they're going to learn?
Well, for example, I might decide to work on verb tenses. If I decide to work on verb tenses, I have a system. Perhaps I should say before this that one of the things that happens with Silent Way is, as much as possible, you are put in front of the whole language. Right? So here, for example, you have all the sounds of English. They're color-coded. It's possible to use the color coding, or it would be possible to use a chart written in phonetics. Absolutely. But all the sounds are there. So if I'm working on a particular sound, for example, I'm working on this one, or this one, or this one, the students know that I'm working on an individual sound within the whole system. Okay. If I'm working on what's behind you, the Fidel, which is called the Fidel or the spelling chart, then what they're looking at is all the ways that you spell the sound A, for example. Okay. And they know that this is the whole system, and within that they're working on a detail. Okay. If I'm working on the verb tenses, all the verb tenses are spread out on the table in front of us on a piece of paper, and they're spread out in such a way that it's possible for them to see all the tenses together. We build this. It's not, I don't spread them out. What I do is I launch them. I launch them by taking a rod like this. I put it on the table. I have a coin which is I, and I put this down, and this represents the present of a verb, whatever. I take, I put, whatever. We decide on a verb. Now, and then from there we work out what it should be, and after that what I'm going to do is work with them on for example, in the past, there are triggers. If the word yesterday is in the sentence, then it's going to be the past sentence.
Okay, now that's getting into a specific way in which you deal with something there. The bigger point you're making, which is more Silent Way, because that's a particular application, that's a particular way.
That's a particular application. The same as this is a particular application of the fact that, as much as possible, you should be dealing with a synthesis of whatever the problem is.
Well, you analyse something within a global synthesis, and the synthesis is available to the students. The students should always be aware of the wider context within which we're working on the specific part. And this, of course, this was Gattegno's, one of Gattegno's nostrums or whatever. This should be true. And this is true normally in learning outside a classroom. We always have a genuine context which we're relating any specific sort of specialisation to, and it can so easily get lost in a language classroom unless you have the synthesis available to the student.
That's right, yes. And the synthesis is just absolutely, really vitally important. Yes, the synthesis of the spelling code, for example, is for example, there I can see, for example, let me see, 4 ways of doing E, and then another 7. And the 7 are written smaller because these are things that are just so uncommon. Sure. People, there's 1, which is EO for E. And amoeba, there's 1, which is OE for E. All right. So this sorts the whole problem of spelling. English spelling is not as irregular as all of that. It has lots and lots of oddities in it, but it's not really as irregular as all that, which is what they see when they see it presented in this way.